Ahoy! Variety recently did an interview with Christoph Hartmann, the chief of Amazon Games, or the vice president. And in this interview, there is some talk about New World, but there's also some talk about their general strategy. And I thought this was very interesting to kind of get a bigger picture of what's going on behind the scenes, because as far as I understand it, Christoph Hartmann is pretty much the person above Scott who would tell him what to do. Now, I can't say how much Christoph is directly involved with New World or how much he's more responsible for the overarching game plan of Amazon Games. That's something we'll probably never be able to find out, but at least we get a glimpse into his mind here. The first question he's asked is, what is the mission of Amazon Games and what are you looking to make? He responds, for me personally, I always want us to be the best games publisher out there in the long run, or at least one of the best publishers out there. But really, when you see also what it does for Amazon, with Amazon becoming much more of an entertainment company, you see the success Prime Video is having. And there's music, there's Audible. And one piece which was missing is games, so we're really part of that bigger entertainment family. That in itself is already a very bold statement, wanting to be the best games publisher out there, when they've only really started doing the publisher side of things. But of course, this is something that Amazon has the potential to scale. You're just starting to open up now about what you've been up to and what you're releasing soon. Why now? And I think it's also worth pointing out, like, he's barely ever talked about New World in the past. There hasn't really been many interviews except one before launch where he mentioned the game. So it is very interesting how rarely or silent he has generally been. Response: as you know, it takes such a long time to make games. Now it's 5 years, if not longer. And the approach we took at Amazon is the long game. Rather than going out on a buying frenzy and just collect studios, and you know how it is, it sometimes works out, but no one talks about the studio acquisitions which don't work out, but there's actually far more than the ones which worked out. We said let's focus on internal and selective external games. When you look from where we started to where we are now, we now have 8 games in development, also very interesting, not something I had heard before. And we're really going to start to get more regular cadence of putting out games. But I'm also someone who believes that you really just can't focus on maybe 2-3 games a year. I am assuming when he talks about 2-3 games a year, he's not just talking about games they specifically are developing or publishing that way, but rather also games from other studios that they're publishing, like for example, Throne and Liberty. Speaking of which, you've just announced you're launching NCSoft's free-to-play MMORPG Throne and Liberty in North America and South America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan in September. How did that deal come about, and what is Amazon Games' involvement in the creative on a project like that? It's done by NCSoft, a very, very huge Korean developer and publisher. And it's really a partnership we did where they manage everything on the home turf and we take care of the publishing side outside of Korea on all platforms. It's the first multi-platform title we have, so there will be a lot of learnings for us, but it really fits also with our strategy. Because when we started off saying, okay, so what games should we do? I said, when you look at different genres, MMO is actually a pretty underserved genre. There hasn't been a lot of new things because it would be pretty stupid to say, hey, let's do a soccer game, let's do a basketball game. It would not have sounded like a smart plan. So we went strategically into MMOs when there was an opportunity, and NCSoft came to us and said, hey, if you want to work together, after the success you have seen of us working together with Smilegate, that really falls into our strategy, where we started off going into MMOs. But obviously now we kind of have a foot also with New World in that genre, and it's expanding our world into other genres. But it's a huge game. Very interesting here that in this context, he does refer to New World as an MMO. Obviously, he's not specifically saying New World Eternum, but at least in some capacity, he's still acknowledging that New World up until this point was an MMO, which in my opinion it will still be afterwards. It's just, a marketing thing more than anything. But yeah, I do think that the perspective of we're probably going to have more success with an MMO than with a soccer game is realistic, but also you're not gonna have much of a chance to compete with FIFA pretty much. It's just too established and everyone else is kind of just struggling to keep up with that. So not really any big revelations there. At this point, we're getting into some topics that I'm going to condense a little bit because there is a lot of fluff that isn't all that relevant for us. So the next major question was about doing Amazon-based, Amazon-related IPs. Like, for example, could they do something with The Boys, which is very popular? But what would that mean? Because it's produced by Sony Pictures, which would then probably mean that PlayStation is involved somehow. In response to that, he names an example about Tomb Raider, where they are going to have a Tomb Raider game coming and they're doing a show. And the question is, will they be linked together? And then his example in response is Spider-Man, where you have amazing games and you have great shows, great movies. So it doesn't need to necessarily be completely mingled together, but it does help each other. He also uses Marvel as an example here, which was based on comics, but then it kind of just transitioned over from there into the shows and everything. And he thinks that in a similar way, games are the newer kind of media to draw inspiration from. And that is something that can be useful because there's so much entertainment on offer now, and it's hard to identify what you want. So the IP is becoming more important. The big question was, does this mean for New World? Because New World is not something that is an established IP, where you could technically make a show based on New World, but I don't think it would be all too popular in comparison to, say, something side by side with Lord of the Rings. He points out that in the early 2000s there was a tendency to make every movie or TV show into a game, which was horrible at the time. There were so many bad games that were based on movies. He mentioned the example of a Dora the Explorer game that was actually selling decently, apparently. He said these days you have to be much more selective and find things that actually make sense, like, for example, Fallout, which was an amazing TV show, and it also led to higher sales for Fallout's franchise in general. For example, Fallout 76 saw a massive boost too, even though that game had a lot of criticism against it before, rightfully so. When asked where he wants to see Amazon games in 5 years, Christoph says that he would like to see some games that work very closely together with Prime Video. What's important to him is basically not to settle once there is one game that may end up being successful. He doesn't want that to be the only one they're focusing on, but rather keep innovating, because some studios have 50, 60, 70% of their revenue coming from a single game, and then maybe they have a second game, and that's about it. And this is a common issue, but many studios are also consistently developing new games and publishing them. They just don't end up being successful. In this regard, Amazon Games obviously has a bit more pull because they can very easily advertise through their own platforms, and they can tie it to those IPs, like, for example, Lord of the Rings. The next question is, how do you see AI affecting the game industry at large, and Amazon in particular, over the next few years? I will say beforehand, I think AI is just a buzzword of the year, and every interview with a big name will include it because they all need to talk about AI, but I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in the foreseeable future this is no longer a mandatory question. But he does say that, of course, Amazon is very involved in that. They have all the tools for it and whatnot, and he thinks that especially in gaming, AI will be very relevant. His example is League of Legends, where if you're a new player, you might hit a wall very quickly if you're playing against very experienced players, but instead you could use an AI to get trained up, have an artificial mentor who helps you, who learns your playing behavior and guides you so you can compete and you can actually play. Gotta say, that whole thing sounds like it's something that's definitely possible, but also would lead to a situation where literally everyone is playing the game the exact same way, which sounds incredibly boring to me and would also take away a lot of the social aspect of maybe learning to play the game with friends. Like, bot games against bots already exist. You can use that to practice. I don't think this whole AI mentor coaching thing would make it make a much better experience. He believes that there aren't as many improvements that are being made on the hardware side anymore, or as drastic at least, and I agree with that. And instead, it's more on the software side. And he says AI will define your game in the future, and we at Amazon as a company are perfectly set up to go and become a major player in that space. But again, this is something that he also kind of has to say because everyone wants to hear every big company say that, yeah, we're doing AI, it's the future. Otherwise, they're going to be skeptical of you for not doing AI pretty much. Next question is why Amazon is focusing on AAA games and not mobile games, whereas Netflix is focused on mobile games. The answer here is quite simple. Mobile games is a very competitive market where it's very winner takes it all and many games are already established, whereas Christoph thinks that in the console market and particularly in the PC market, there are more opportunities. Additionally, his own background is also in PC games, so he says that if it was focus on mobile games all of a sudden, then he'd have to hire someone for that. Next, he's asked how the release schedule for Amazon will be looking like and if they are avoiding release windows for key competitor titles like Rockstar's GTA 6, which will come in fall 2025. He personally did work on the marketing side for GTA, so he holds that game dearly, he says. And of course, similar games should avoid that release window, but he says, for example, for an MMO, that's very different. With New World's console version, it's a very unique game coming to console. There's not much comparable out there, so why would you steer away? And I completely agree. I don't think the audience for New World and for GTA has a massive overlap. Again, very relevant here, even in this console context, he calls New World an MMO. He doesn't call it a New World Eternum either, but it's very interesting that in his mind, this is still way more of an MMO, and he underlines it, even though this is a very, very recent interview. He says that obviously with the release window, you want to avoid releasing at the exact same time, but for example, if GTA was to release in October, you could absolutely sell a game again in January. When asked about Amazon's monetization strategy, he obviously points out the free-to-play models versus the games that you buy, and really he doesn't say anything particularly deep here, just that ideally, everyone would obviously want to get games for free, but also people need to make money if they're working for a games company. So there's a situation here where they want to keep things fair. That's important to them, that the prices are fair. And I would say, at least in context of New World, the prices have been mostly fair for the consumers. Only exception, I would say, were the gear sets. He also mentions that he doesn't want pay to win, which is going to be interesting with Throne and Liberty, who kind of seem to have at least some degree of pay to win. The question was when we get to hear more about Tomb Raider and The Lord of the Rings, and when those titles will be released. He says, it's not going to be tomorrow, but it's not too far away. As I said, we are getting into a much more regular cadence of shipping games. That's all I'm allowed to tell you right now. It's all about quality. You don't want to be just rushed out. That doesn't work. It also has to be AAA quality because the bar is so high. But this is interesting in the context of everything that is going on. He says that Lord of the Rings in particular isn't too far away. I don't really care that much about the Tomb Raider game, which would mean that we are at least going to hear something about it sooner rather than later. I don't know how exactly this works, because maybe it helps that Amazon is also working on the technology for Lord of the Rings while they're developing New World. But not too long ago on a Discord chat, one of the devs said that only like 5 people were working on Lord of the Rings. So weird that it seems to have made such quick progress. I don't know, maybe we will actually see it sooner than expected. Maybe they were also using part of the things that they were already working on for the Lord of the Rings MMO before they cancelled it for the first time. Maybe that is accelerating things somewhat. When asked how Amazon Games compares to other gaming companies in terms of growth and hiring amidst the industry-wide layoffs, he says they're actually investing right now. They've opened up the new studio in Bucharest. He says there's lots of good talent in Eastern Europe and lots of good game studios, games coming from there. And now they have the studio in Montreal, which will keep on growing. So they're in a phase where they're heavily expanding with their internal studios. And they're also looking at other locations. He describes that the current situation actually benefits Amazon because during COVID times there was a hiring and buying frenzy and it was very hard to get talent. And now that things are more on a low, it's much easier for them to get people that want to work for them. And yeah, that's why they're kind of just hiring all over the place, looking at it as an investment, like a stock basically, buying low and selling high or whatever. And he says very explicitly that if there are any game developers out there, please look at all the ads we have everywhere. We're looking for a lot of talent to grow internally. Now, of course, this is with an asterisk insofar that they are looking for talent, but the reputation of Amazon as a studio is at least mixed. I think most of the employees that work there are fairly happy with their experience there, from what I've heard, but also, of course, the stability, the safety, and whatnot seem to be unclear, with New World, for example, not really performing well and everything else kind of just being on the horizon still. So it's going to be very hard to see where it goes, and also the history of Amazon previously having shut down quite a few games very quickly and without warning. One thing that I'm hearing from all this is that they heavily want to tie the Lord of the Rings MMO to the show that they have, which I think is technically a good idea, which makes sense. It's just that the show needs to be on a level where it actually draws in people to want more of that. Of course, you will have all the people that have already watched Lord of the Rings that will be interested through that, so it's not like you're not going to get players with a Lord of the Rings MMO. That's never going to happen. But the draw could be bigger and more direct if they get the Rings of Power show to succeed a little more. If that was on the same level as the Fallout show, which is just excellent, then that would result in much more popularity for whatever game they release alongside it. We'll see what happens down the line, but overall I thought this was very interesting. If you're interested in more updates like this, then consider subscribing and clicking the bell. And if you'd like to support me further, you can do so on my Patreon. Thanks to all of my patrons, where I do exactly that. And thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.